Hello. This video is a part of a series of videos on making CAM for the Bechtel Center at Purdue. Last video, we made this progression, starting from the raw stock, moving on to our first operation, and then finishing off with our last operation. Now we need to go and actually make use of this and import our tables and import everything else before we can actually get ready and make some CAM. To do that, we need to make yet another file. Cool. And you can save this file as something op1. In this case, because I'm making the BADC1, I'm going to name it BADC1 op1. And op1 stands for operation 1. When you make the second half of your setup, then you could name it op2, or you can potentially make them both in the same file, and that would bypass that whole thing. But in this case, op1 is what I'm going to name it because it's going to be the first operation. Great. So the first thing we need to do is insert, derive, and we need to go and import our from our steps file. Cool. And in this case, we just want to go and import all of this except for the last model. And the reason for that is that right now we're only making the first operation. So the last model doesn't matter because we're going from this to this. Great. So now we have two models imported. Now you'll notice there's a small problem, and that our models kind of float around. Our joint didn't copy over. So the way you can do that is you can select these two models like that. You can select them both by holding Control and clicking on them both. Right click, and then click a rigid group. You press OK. And this just tells Fusion to treat them as one body. Cool. Next thing we need to do is we need to go and import our table model. And this is just a model of how the table in the machine is set up. All the vices and all the probing bits and everything. And make sure that you don't accidentally machine something that you weren't supposed to. So to do that, you go back into the work holding stocks and machines project. Same place you got your stock. Fusion's being a little bit slow today. There we go. Scroll down to the tables. And here you see we have a couple of tables. The SR100 is the wood gantry router, and that's not what we're using for this. At least not what I'm using for mine. If you are using it, then that's what you'll use. The two important ones here are the VF2 and the VF4 4-axis. The VF4 is a larger machine, and so if you're making larger parts then you can use that. In this case, my part is more than small enough to fit inside the VF2, so that's what I'm going to use. So to import the table model, click on it, and then just drag it in. You see it's going to take Fusion 1 second. And there we go. We're going to press OK. And you'll see here that last video I talked about the different levels of flatness. And you'll see here that the different jaws that I was talking about. These are the snap jaws, and they can clamp on. And they can clamp onto stock that has those extruded out of the factory sides. And the way they do that is, not sure if I can show that to you here if it's modeled, but basically they have little tiny teeth that can grip onto the stock really well, even if it's not super flat. And the downside of this is that they do leave little tiny marks on your stock because of those little tiny teeth. However, in this case, my stock is machined flat, so I'm just going to use these flat jaws over here. Cool. But now you'll notice that these two models are not put together. So before we can do anything else, we need to go and put these models into the same space so that we can tell Fusion, hey, you're going to start with this and you're going to end with this, but you want to move it 3 feet to the right or something. So the first thing we need to do, we need to joint again and joint our two pieces of stock together. Cool. Once again, it flipped, so I'm just going to flip it back. And there you go. Now you can see that there's one little package of a model. Now the one downside is that you can't see the model anymore because there's a chunk of stock in the way. To do that, find the appropriate stock. It's this one. Right click on it and select your opacity setting. In this case, I'm going to set mine to 40%, but you can play around and see what looks best to you. There you go. Now you can see that even though that there is a model in the way, we can see through it and still see our desired designed result. In this case, you can also see that from top distance, from the top of the model to the top of the stock. Excellent. Now that we have this completed, we could joint the part into the vise, but there is one thing we need to do. And remember how in the first steps file, when we made a change to our cuboid stock, it made a change in our steps file. And in some cases like that, that's a great thing. We wanted to do that. In other cases like this, if somebody makes a change to the to this VF2 model, we don't want it to update in our version, because let's say someone changes how far open the jaws are. That what is correct for their setup is probably not correct for mine. So we need to break the link and tell Fusion, hey, don't make those updates. To do that, right click on the VF2 model and then break link. We have the same, hey, you moved stuff around error as last time. And I'm going to just capture position. This will take Fusion 1 second to go and recalculate all of the geometry. There we go. There we go. Now you can see that the little chain, and there's no little chain or no little arrow by the VF2, which means that this model is no longer linked to anything else. Cool. Now that's done, we can go and join our model into the vise. I'm just going to go and join the bottom section of that. And I'm going to go and joint it to the center of one of these vices. And that center is marked by this little black ball right here. If I can rotate this right, yeah, you can see that all of the vices have one. But in this case, I'm using the flats, so I'm going to joint it to the ball in the middle of the flats. And you can see that only one of our components actually moved. The other one's still back there. And the reason is that this is just a preview of what's going to happen. When you press OK, Fusion will update and bring all the other models that are jointed and bring them along for the ride. So you press OK. I can see that. Well, there we go. The model is now jointed properly. Except the jaws are not how they should be. You can see that they're kind of phasing through the solid aluminum of our part, which is not ideal, and that's not how the jaws will actually be clamping. In order to fix this, we can go into Modify and change parameters. And you'll see here that we have a couple of parameters. The important ones are these three down here, the jaw gaps. And if you can't see all of them, you can just drag this open so you can actually see them. In this case, I put mine into the short flat jaws. So I'm going to change my jaw gap to 2 inches, which I know how wide my stock is. Cool. And you can see in the background that these jaws updated, moved apart. Now they're actually clamping onto the sides of my model instead of wherever they were clamping before. Great. Now that that's done, we need to joint our vise to the origin of our model. And the reason for that is that we can still just kind of drag our whole vise around like this. And the reason that's not good is because if we're making cam and it's going to say, hey, tool should go here and then here and then here. Well, if it tells the tool to say like touch this little probe up here, and then we move this whole thing a little bit to the right or to the left, then all of a sudden it used to be touching here, but now it says, hey, I need to regenerate. I need to go and figure out where all the models are again. And that's just going to spending a lot of time generating and regenerating all your stuff if you even bump your model. And that's not great. So to do that, we can open up our joint command once again, and we can joint any point on the vice model to the origin. And I like to use this point just because it's sticking out. But like I said, you can use any point. If you can't see the origin, you can click this little eye up here and it'll pull it up. And if I click this, you can see that the whole thing moves over. And if I press OK, now I can't move this vice model around anymore. Excellent. With this completed, we are ready to move on to the manufacturing setup, but that will come in the next video. Thank you and have a good day.